Albert, a cold and calculated 35-year-old Korean Mafia boss in Seoul, believes that power is the only protection against betrayal. During a high-stakes dinner, his life is saved by Mira, an 8-year-old homeless girl who risks everything to whisper that his girlfriend, Ella, has poisoned his drink. Albert's decision to trust the child over his partner sets off a chain of events that leads him to Mira's mother, also living on the streets. Instead of a world of violence, the story shifts into a redemptive journey. Albert uses his vast resources to provide a life of dignity for the duo, discovering that the standard of a true leader isn't how much blood he spills, but how many lives he can transform. "Don't drink it, it is poisoned." Those 6 words were whispered by an 8-year-old girl whose fingers were trembling against the silk sleeve of Albert's black tailored suit. Mira's face was smudged with the dust of Seoul's back alleys, her eyes wide with a terror that surpassed her years. She had slipped past 4 armed bodyguards into the city's most exclusive private dining room just to reach him. Albert, the 35-year-old head of the Lee syndicate, sat frozen. He had exactly 30 seconds before his girlfriend, Ella, returned to the table with a smile that he now realized was a mask for murder. Looking at the small, ragged girl, Albert felt a coldness sharper than any blade. He was a man who lived by the rule that trust was a death sentence. Yet, looking into Mira's honest, panicked eyes, he made a choice that defied every instinct he had ever honed. He switched the glasses in a blur of motion. 30 seconds later, as Ella raised her glass to a toast of eternal loyalty, the trajectory of Albert's life shifted forever. He didn't know then that this wasn't just about surviving a betrayal. It was the moment the most feared man in Korea began to find his soul. If this high-stakes opening caught your breath, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you don't miss a single chapter of this journey. We love our global community. Let us know in the comments, which city or country are you watching from today? The private dining room of the Emerald Pavilion was a masterpiece of cold perfection. Hand-painted silk screens lined the walls, and the floor was a seamless slab of black obsidian that reflected the flickering candlelight like a dark mirror. At the center of this silence sat Albert, the 35-year-old leader of the Lee syndicate. To the outside world, Albert was a ghost, a man who moved billions of one with a single text message. To his enemies, he was the Ice King. He sat with his back to the wall, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room even in moments of supposed leisure. For Albert, the world was a chessboard, and he was the only player who couldn't afford to lose a piece. Image, a wide, cinematic shot of Albert sitting alone at a long, opulent table. He is dressed in a sharp black suit, his expression unreadable and cold, surrounded by the shadows of the silent, expensive restaurant. Opposite him was Ella. She was beautiful in a way that felt manufactured, every hair in place, a diamond necklace worth a small apartment glittering against her throat. She had been by Albert's side for 2 years, the only person he allowed within his inner circle. "You're unusually quiet tonight, Albert," Ella said, her voice like honey. She reached across the table, her manicured hand brushing his. "Is the merger with the Northern Territories weighing on you?" Albert didn't pull away, but he didn't lean in. "In this business, Ella, silence is the only thing that doesn't betray you." Ella laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "Always so cynical. I'll be right back. I need to freshen up before our main course arrives." As she walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the obsidian floor, Albert watched her. He didn't see a lover, he saw a variable. Outside, the temperature in Seoul had plummeted. In the narrow alleyway behind the restaurant, Mira, just 8 years old, huddled against her mother, Suji. They sat on a flattened cardboard box, wrapped in a single, thin blanket that smelled of damp earth. "Mama, my tummy hurts from the quiet," Mira whispered. Suji pulled her daughter closer, her hands chapped and red from the cold. Once, Suji had been a seamstress with a bright shop, but a series of misfortunes and a lack of a safety net had pushed them to the edge. "Close your eyes, Mira. Imagine we are sitting in a field of warm sunflowers. The sun is so hot it makes your skin tingle." Mira tried to imagine it, but the smell of expensive charcoal-grilled meat from the restaurant's vents was too strong. She stood up, her legs shaking. "I'm going to find some water, Mama. Stay warm." Mira wandered toward the back entrance of the pavilion, hopping to find a discarded bottle. Instead, she saw a side door left propped open by a distracted waiter. Stepping inside was like entering another planet. The air was warm and smelled of lilies. She crept through the hallway, her small, dirty, bare feet making no sound on the plush carpets. She stopped behind a silk screen, her eyes wide as she saw the beautiful lady, the one from the table, standing by a service station. Mira watched as Ella pulled a small glass vial from her designer clutch. With trembling fingers but a determined face, Ella emptied a clear liquid into the deep red wine in Albert's glass. Mira didn't know who the man was, but she knew what a bad secret looked like. She had seen men in the alleys hurt each other, and the look on Ella's face was the same. Image, a close-up of little Mira, eyes wide with horror, peeking from behind a gold leaf screen as Ella's hand hovers over a wine glass, pouring a mysterious liquid. When Ella turned to walk back toward the restroom to hide the vial, Mira made a choice. She didn't run back to the cold alley. She ran toward the man in the black suit. She reached the table just as the 30-second countdown in her head began. She grabbed the sleeve of Albert's suit, her small, dark hand a stain on his perfect charcoal wool. Albert froze. His body went into a combat stance, his hand moving toward the hidden holster beneath his jacket. But then he looked down. He saw a child who looked like a ghost of everything he had discarded to become a king. "Don't drink it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It is poisoned." Albert's gray eyes locked onto hers. In the distance, he heard the click-clack of Ella's heels returning. He had seconds to decide if this child was a hallucination, a trap, or his only savior. The sound of Ella's heels grew louder, a rhythmic ticking clock that echoed against the obsidian floors. Albert didn't blink. His gaze remained locked on Mira's trembling form. He saw the grime under her fingernails, the shivering of her small shoulders, and the raw, unfiltered honesty in her eyes. In the world of the Lee Syndicate, people only approached Albert to take something. But this child had risked her life to give him something, his survival. With a movement so fluid it was almost invisible, Albert reached out. He didn't grab his glass, he grabbed both. In one sweeping motion, he switched the deep red liquids. He placed the tainted glass, the one intended for his death, directly in front of Ella's empty chair. "Go," Albert whispered to Mira, his voice a low, commanding vibration. "Hide behind the screen. Do not make a sound." Mira scrambled back into the shadows just as the heavy velvet curtains parted. Ella glided back into the room, her smile radiant, oblivious to the fact that the predator had become the prey. "Sorry to keep you waiting, darling," Ella purred, smoothing her silk dress as she sat down. She looked at her glass, then at Albert's. A glint of triumph flashed in her eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Shall we have that toast now, to our future?" Albert picked up the safe glass, his fingers steady. "To loyalty, Ella, and to the things we see when people think we aren't looking." Image, a tense, close-up split screen. On one side, Ella is smiling charmingly as she raises the poisoned wine glass to her lips. On the other side, Albert is watching her over the rim of his glass, his eyes cold and knowing, while Mira peeks fearfully from the shadows behind them. Ella took a long, graceful sip. Albert watched her throat move as she swallowed the very end she had authored for him. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Ella's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the obsidian floor. Her hand flew to her throat, her eyes bulging as the fast-acting sedative and toxin began to take hold. She tried to speak, to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped. She slumped forward, her forehead hitting the mahogany table with a hollow thud. Albert didn't move to help her. He simply set his glass down. "Secure her," he said to the air. Immediately. Two shadows detached themselves from the corners of the room. His lead security detail, Jin, appeared. "Sir." "Take her to the holding room. Find out who paid her. I want names, bank accounts, and every contact she's made in the last 48 hours, Albert commanded. As they hauled the unconscious Ella away, Albert turned his attention to the gold leaf screen. "Come out." Mira stepped into the light, looking even smaller in the vast, blood-stained luxury of the room. She was shaking violently now. "Why did you tell me?" Albert asked, walking toward her. He towered over her, but he kept his hands visible, his posture less aggressive. Because my mama says even if the world is cold, we shouldn't let people be mean to each other," Mira whispered, her voice small. Albert felt a strange, uncomfortable pang in his chest, a heart he thought had turned to stone years ago. He looked at her tattered clothes and then out the window toward the freezing rain. "Where is your mother?" "In the alley. She's waiting for me. She's cold, mister." Albert didn't hesitate. He stripped off his expensive charcoal suit jacket and draped it over Mira's shoulders. It swallowed her whole, the hem dragging on the floor, but the silk lining was warm. "Lead the way," Albert said. Albert, now in just his white dress shirt and vest, walking out of the back exit of the luxury restaurant into the rainy, dark alley. He is following the small girl, who is wrapped in his oversized designer suit jacket. As they stepped into the biting wind of the alley, Albert saw her. A woman, thin and pale, huddled on a wet cardboard box. Suji looked up, her eyes widening in terror as she saw a powerful, well-dressed man approaching her daughter. "Mira, get away from him," Suji cried, trying to stand, but her legs gave way from exhaustion and cold. "It's okay, Mama." Mira ran to her, the oversized jacket fluttering. "He's the man. I told him about the bad secret and he gave me his coat." Albert stood at the mouth of the alley, his polished shoes hovering over a puddle of dirty water. He looked at the woman, once proud, now broken by a city that had no room for the poor. He thought of his own mother, who had died in a place not much better than this because his father had been too busy building a throne to build a home. "My name is Albert," he said, his voice softening. "Your daughter saved my life tonight. In my world, a debt to a Lee is never left unpaid." He turned to Jin, who had followed him out. "Call the car and tell the housekeeper to prepare the east wing. We're having guests." The black-armored SUV glided to a halt at the mouth of the narrow, trash-strewn alley. Its headlights cut through the misty Seoul rain like twin searchlights, illuminating the heartbreaking scene of a mother and daughter clinging to each other on a wet cardboard box. Albert stood by the open door, his white dress shirt stark against the darkness. He watched as his men trained for war, hesitated for the first time in their lives. They didn't know how to handle a woman who was crying from relief rather than fear. "Jin, help them," Albert commanded quietly. Jin, a mountain of a man with a scarred face, stepped forward. He knelt in the mud and gently lifted Suji as if she were made of glass. Mira followed close behind, still drowning in Albert's oversized suit jacket, her small hand gripping her mother's tattered sleeve. A high-contrast cinematic shot. The massive, sleek black SUV is parked in the grimy alley. Jin is lifting the frail mother into the luxurious leather interior, while Albert stands nearby, a silhouette of power against the neon lights of the city. As the car pulled away, the interior was filled with the scent of expensive leather and the quiet, rhythmic shivering of the two guests. Mira stared at the glowing buttons on the door, her eyes wide. She had never been inside anything so warm. "Eat," Albert said, sliding a small box of luxury chocolates from the center console toward Mira. She looked at her mother for permission. Suji nodded weakly. Mira took one, her eyes fluttering shut as the taste of high-quality cocoa hit her tongue, the first thing she had eaten in 2 days. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Lee?" Suji asked, her voice raspy. "Men like you don't usually look down at the sidewalk." "Men like me usually die because they don't look," Albert replied, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights. "Your daughter saw a threat I was blind to. In my world, that makes her more valuable than my entire security detail." He turned to look at Suji. "How did you end up here? A woman with your dignity doesn't choose the street." Suji's story poured out like a broken dam. She spoke of her husband's sudden death, the mounting medical debts, and a predatory loan shark associated with the Kang syndicate. Albert's rivals. They had seized her home and her sewing shop, leaving her with nothing but Mira and the clothes on their backs. Image, a close-up of Albert's face in the dim light of the car. His jaw is tight, his eyes darkening with a cold, focused rage as he hears the name of his rival, Jae-hoon Lee, mentioned in the context of Suji's downfall. Meanwhile, across the city in a high-rise penthouse, Jae-hoon Lee was staring at his phone. Beside him stood Lara, his cold-eyed strategist. "Ella isn't answering," Lara said, her voice like ice. "The tracker on her phone shows she's at one of Albert's quiet properties. The poison failed." Jae-hoon smashed a crystal glass against the wall. "How? He was supposed to be dead by dessert. Albert is a man of habit. He never misses a toast." "A variable interfered," Lara replied, pulling up a grainy security feed from the restaurant's back entrance. It showed a small, blurred figure in rags slipping inside. "A street rat," she warned him. Jae-hoon narrowed his eyes. "Albert thinks he's a savior now. Good. A man with a heart is a man with a target. Find out who that girl is. If Albert wants to play house, we'll make sure the house burns down around him." Back at the Lee estate, the gates swung open. Mira gasped as she saw the sprawling mansion, lit up like a palace. "Is this a hotel, Mama?" Mira whispered. "No," Albert said as the car stopped. "It's a fortress, and for as long as you need it, it's home." The iron gates of the Lee estate didn't just lock out the world, they locked out the cold. As the SUV pulled into the circular driveway, the mansion loomed like a palace of glass and stone. For Mira and Suji, it was a dream they were afraid to wake up from. Albert led them inside, his presence commanding the immediate attention of the household staff. He gestured to a middle-aged woman with a kind face and silver-threaded hair. "Mrs. Park, this is Suji and her daughter, Mira. They are my personal guests. Prepare the East Wing. I want them bathed, fed, and given the best clothes the city can deliver within the hour." Mrs. Park gasped, looking at the mud on the pristine marble floor from Mira's bare feet, but one look at Albert's eyes silenced any questions. "Right away, sir." Image, a high-angle shot of the grand foyer. Albert stands in the center of the white marble hall, his shadow long and imposing. Mrs. Park is bowing respectfully, while the tiny, ragged figure of Mira looks up at the massive crystal chandelier in awe. As Mira was led away, she looked back at Albert. "Are you going to be okay without your jacket, Mr. Boss?" Albert paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I think I'll manage, Mira. Go with Mrs. Park." While the girls were being cared for, Albert retreated to his study. The room was a sanctuary of dark oak and leather, but tonight, the air felt thick with tension. His laptop screen flickered. A secure video call was waiting. It was the Syndicate Board, a group of 5 elders who managed the business side of the Lee Empire. "Albert," the eldest, Chairman Min, began. His voice was a raspy growl. "We've heard rumors of a disturbance at the pavilion, and now reports that you've brought street beggars into the ancestral home. Have you forgotten who we are?" "I have forgotten nothing," Albert replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low frequency. "A child saved my life tonight from an assassin you failed to vet. If I had followed your standard, I would be in a morgue right now." "A child is a liability," another board member barked. "The Kang family is already laughing. They say the Tiger of Seoul has become a nanny." Albert leaned into the camera, his eyes turning to flint. "Then let them laugh. And tell the Kang family this. The next person who mentions that child's name with anything but respect will find out why the tiger has claws. This is no longer just business. It is a debt of honor. And in this house, my word is the only law." He slammed the laptop shut. Image, a cinematic close-up of Albert in his dark study. One side of his face is illuminated by the glowing computer screen, while the other is lost in deep shadow. His jaw is set in a hard line of defiance. An hour later, there was a soft knock on his door. "Enter," he said. The door opened, and Albert actually stood up from his chair. Suji stood there, dressed in a modest but elegant silk dress, her face clean and her dignity restored. Beside her was Mira. She wore a soft, cream-colored wool sweater and denim skirts, her micro braids neatly tied back. She looked like a different person, a child who finally felt safe. "Thank you," Suji said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." "You already have," Albert said, looking at Mira. "Your daughter gave me back a future I almost lost tonight." Mira walked over to his desk and placed a small, crumpled flower she had found in the East Wing's indoor garden on his leather blotter. "For you, Mr. Boss, so your room isn't so dark." Albert looked at the simple flower. For the first time in 15 years, the Ice King felt a crack in his armor. But as they stood in that moment of peace, Jin entered, his face pale. "Sir, we have a problem. Jae-hoon Lee has just released a statement to the press. He's claiming you've kidnapped a citizen's child and is calling for a public investigation. He's turning your act of mercy into a crime." The news report on the giant screen in Albert's study was a calculated strike. Jae-hoon Lee, standing before a crowd of reporters, looked like a concerned citizen rather than a rival mafia don. "We are deeply concerned about the welfare of this child," Jae-hoon said into the microphones. "For a man like Albert to take a homeless girl into his fortress, it raises questions no decent society can ignore." Albert watched the screen, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him, Suji's face had gone pale. "They're going to take her away, aren't they?" she whispered. "They'll use the law to put us back on the street." "Not while I'm breathing," Albert replied. He turned to Jin. "Block every exit. If a single investigator steps onto my property without a court order signed by the Chief Justice himself, treat them as a hostile invader. But do not, I repeat, do not, let Mira see a single weapon." Image, a dramatic shot of the estate gates. Outside, news vans and black sedans are gathered like vultures. Inside, the private security team is standing in a disciplined line, hidden behind the high stone walls, while Albert stands on the balcony looking down at the chaos. While Albert coordinated a legal counterstrike, Mira was in the mansion's vast library. She wasn't looking at the books, she was looking at the portraits on the walls. She stopped in front of a painting of a woman who looked strikingly like Albert, but with a warmth in her eyes that Albert lacked. Suji found her there. That must be his mother, Mira. "She looks sad, Mama," Mira said, touching the gold frame. "Like she's waiting for someone to come home." Suji looked at the dates on the plaque below the painting. Albert's mother had passed away when he was just a teenager. Suddenly, Suji realized why this Ice King had a nursery wing ready and why he looked at Mira with a mix of wonder and pain. He wasn't just saving Mira, he was trying to save the child he used to be. Later that evening, the tension reached a breaking point. A fleet of black government sedans arrived at the gate. The Elite Academic and Social Oversight Committee, a group secretly on Jae-hoon's payroll, demanded entry. Albert didn't hide. He walked down the long driveway alone, meeting them at the iron bars. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing the scars on his forearms from his early days of building his empire. "You have no jurisdiction here," Albert stated. "We have a report of child endangerment," the lead official sneered. "Hand over the girl, or we return with a warrant and the National Guard." Before Albert could respond, a small voice rang out. "I'm not in danger." Mira had escaped Mrs. Park's watch. She ran down the driveway and slid her small hand through the iron bars, gripping Albert's hand. She turned to the officials, her voice small but piercingly clear. "He gave me a flower," Mira said, pointing back toward the house. "And he gave my mama a bed. You didn't give us anything when we were in the rain. Why do you want to take me back to the cold?" Image, a powerful, low-angle shot. Albert and Mira stand hand in hand behind the iron gates. Albert looks down at her with a look of fierce, fatherly protection, while the officials outside look stunned by the child's defiance. The cameras of the nearby news crews caught the moment. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't a kidnapping, it was a sanctuary. Albert looked at the lead official. "You heard her. Now get off my land before I decide to make this personal." But as the cars retreated, Albert noticed a red laser dot dancing across the gravel near Myra's feet. A sniper. Jae-hoon wasn't just playing a legal game, he was looking for a clear shot. The red dot on the gravel was a silent scream. Albert's combat training took over instantly. Without looking up to reveal he had spotted the sniper, he pulled Mira into his chest, shielding her with his body as he turned toward the mansion. "Jin, perimeter breach, Sector 4, Albert barked into his earpiece. In one fluid motion, he swept Mira off her feet and signaled for Suji. They didn't run. They moved with a calculated, urgent pace that kept them behind the thick stone pillars of the driveway. A suppressed thwip echoed behind them, a high-velocity round shattering a decorative marble urn exactly where Mira had been standing a second ago. Image, a high-tension shot of Albert running toward the mansion doors, clutching Mira tightly to his chest. Behind him, the marble urn is exploding into white dust. Suji is running beside him, her face a mask of pure terror. "Mama, what was that sound?" Mira cried, her face buried in Albert's neck. "Just a bird, Mira. Keep your eyes closed," Albert lied, his voice a low, steady anchor in the chaos. They reached the grand foyer, but Albert didn't stop at the stairs. He moved toward the library and pressed a hidden lever behind the portrait of his mother. The massive oak bookshelf groaned and swung inward, revealing a sleek, steel-lined elevator. "Where are we going?" Suji gasped as the doors hissed shut. "To the only place in Seoul where the world can't touch you," Albert replied. The elevator descended deep into the bedrock of the estate. When the doors opened, they weren't in a dark dungeon, but a high-tech, sun-simulated bunker. It was a secondary home, filled with books, a kitchen, and walls of monitors showing every inch of the estate above. While Mira explored the secret clubhouse, Albert pulled Suji aside. He looked exhausted, the weight of the night finally catching up to him. "Jae-hoon Lee has crossed the line," Albert said, watching the monitors as his men engaged the snipers in the forest surrounding the house. "He's no longer interested in the girl. He wants to erase the fact that I protected her, because if I can protect a nobody, then the other families will realize they don't have to fear him either." "Why did you really take us in, Albert?" Suji asked softly. "It wasn't just the debt, was it?" Albert looked at the monitor showing Mira laughing as she found a plush toy left in a corner of the bunker. "When I was 15, my father was assassinated. I was the one who found him. For years, I believed that the only way to honor him was to be more ruthless than the men who killed him. I built this bunker for myself, a place to hide when the world got too loud." He turned to Suji, his eyes reflecting the blue light of the screens. "But when Mira whispered to me tonight, I realized I've spent 20 years building a cage, not a kingdom. She didn't see a boss. She saw a person. I haven't been a person for a very long time." Image, a quiet, emotional close-up in the dimly lit bunker. Albert is leaning against a wall of glowing monitors, looking at Mira in the background. His expression is vulnerable for the first time, while Suji watches him with newfound understanding. Their moment was interrupted by a flashing red light on the console. Lara, Jae-hoon's strategist, appeared on the screen. She wasn't at the gates anymore. She was sitting in a high-tech van, a cold smirk on her face. "Albert," she said, her voice echoing through the bunker speakers. "You think you're safe in your hole? We found the one thing you forgot to scrub. Your mother's old seamstress shop. The one you've been secretly funding for years. We're standing in front of it right now with a gallon of gasoline. You have 10 minutes to bring the girl to the gate, or we burn your mother's only remaining legacy to the ground." Lara's threat hung in the air of the bunker like a toxic mist. Albert stared at the screen, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the violation of the only piece of his mother he had left. The old seamstress shop was where he went to remember her scent, the sound of her sewing machine, and the feeling of being a son instead of a soldier. "Albert, don't," Suji whispered, grabbing his arm. "It's a trap. If you go there, they'll kill you, and if you take Mira, they'll take her." Albert didn't look away from the screen. "I spent my life thinking that to win, I had to be the one with the biggest gun. Jae-hoon thinks I'm still that man. He expects me to arrive with a strike team." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Albert's face. "But I'm going to use a weapon he doesn't understand. The truth." Image, a close-up of Albert's eyes in the dark bunker, reflecting the glowing blue light of the security monitors. He looks determined and sharp, his Ice King persona shifting into something more strategic and evolved. Albert sat at the main console. He didn't call his soldiers, he called his media lead. Jin, bypass the syndicate's private servers. I want a live stream link pushed to every major news outlet in Korea, and I want it translated into 5 languages. Title it, The True Face of the Syndicate. 10 minutes later, as Lara held a flickering lighter near a stack of dry wood at the old shop, her phone, and the phones of every person in Seoul, chirped with an emergency notification. Instead of a battle, the world saw a live feed from the Lee estate. Albert stood in his study, but he wasn't alone. Suji and Mira stood beside him. Mira was holding the small flower she had given him. "My name is Albert," he began, his voice calm and echoing through millions of speakers. "The men standing at a small seamstress shop across town right now are employees of Jae-hoon Lee. They are threatening to burn a piece of history because I chose to provide a home for a child they preferred to see starve. This is not a war over territory. This is a war over the standard of our city." Image, a split-screen visual. On the left, Lara and her men are caught in the glare of their own headlights, looking confused as they realize they are being filmed by a hidden drone Albert had deployed. On the right, Albert is speaking with calm authority to the camera, looking like a statesman rather than a mobster. "If that shop burns," Albert continued, "it won't be my legacy that turns to ash. It will be the reputation of every board member who supports Jae-hoon. I am not hiding. I am standing right here, protecting a girl who saved my life. Decide now, Seoul, who do you want ruling your streets? The man who burns shops or the man who builds homes?" The public reaction was instantaneous. Thousands of comments flooded the stream. The police, pressured by the sudden global spotlight, flooded the coordinates of the shop. Lara, realizing she was being watched by the entire world, dropped the lighter and fled into the night. Inside the bunker, Mira hugged Albert's waist. "Did we win, Mr. Boss?" Albert looked at the screen, seeing the police cordoning off his mother's shop, keeping it safe. He looked at Suji, who had tears of relief in her eyes. "We didn't just win, Mira," Albert said, picking her up. "We changed the rules of the game." But as the stream ended, Jin walked in, his face grave. "Sir, Jae-hoon Lee has been abandoned by the board, but he's gone into hiding. He has nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous variable we've ever faced." The fall of Jae-hoon Lee was swift in the eyes of the public, but in the underworld, a wounded animal is the most lethal. While the police searched for him, Albert remained in the bunker. He watched the screens, not for the police, but for the one thing he knew Jae-hoon couldn't resist, a final confrontation. Suddenly, the estate's external alarms remained silent, but a private line in the bunker began to ring. It was the security feed from the mansion's grand kitchen. There, sitting at the island counter with a bottle of expensive whiskey and a lighter, was Jae-hoon Lee. He had bypassed the gates through an old drainage tunnel only the founding families knew about. "Albert," Jae-hoon said, looking directly into the security camera, "you turned the world against me with your little live stream. You made me a ghost, but a ghost can still burn a house down. I'm sitting on 10 gallons of gasoline, Albert. Come up and finish this, or I'll turn this fortress into a funeral pyre for all of us." Image, a chilling shot of Jae-hoon Lee in the dark, high-end kitchen. He looks disheveled and manic, holding a flickering lighter over a pool of clear liquid on the floor. His eyes are hollow, reflecting a man who has lost his empire and only seeks destruction. Albert stood up. He reached into a drawer and pulled out his heavy service pistol. The cold weight of the steel felt familiar, the old way calling him back. "Albert, no," Suji pleaded, stepping into his path. "That's what he wants. He wants you to come up there and be the monster the board thinks you are. If you kill him, the police will arrest you, and Mira will lose the only father figure she's ever had." Albert looked at the gun, then at Mira, who was watching him from across the room. She didn't know about the gasoline or the threat. She only saw the man who had given her a flower and a warm bed. "If I don't go, we all die," Albert said. Then go as the man you want her to remember, Suji said firmly. Albert put the gun back in the drawer. He took a deep breath, straightened his shirt, and stepped into the elevator alone. When the doors opened into the kitchen, the smell of fumes was overpowering. Jae-hoon looked up, surprised to see Albert's hands were empty. "Where's your weapon, Albert? Too excellent to soil your hands." Jae-hoon sneered, his thumb hovering over the lighter's spark wheel. "The weapon is already in your hand, Jae-hoon," Albert said, walking calmly toward the island, stopping just a few feet away. "If you spark that lighter, you die, I die. But more importantly, the world sees you as exactly what I called you, a man who burns things because he's too small to build them." Image, a high-tension face-off in the kitchen. The floor is shimmering with gasoline. Albert stands tall and calm, his hands open and visible. Jae-hoon is hunched over the counter, the small flame of the lighter dancing between them. "I have nothing left," Jae-hoon screamed. "You have your life," Albert replied. "Outside those gates, the police are waiting. If you walk out now, you live to see another day. If you stay, you become a footnote in my story. A story about a man who tried to kill a child and failed." Albert reached out his hand, not for a weapon, but for the lighter. "Don't let your last act on Earth be a tantrum. Give it to me." For a long minute, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Jae-hoon's hand shook. He looked at Albert's calm, steady eyes, the eyes of a man who was no longer a prisoner of his own shadow. With a sob of defeated rage, Jae-hoon closed the lighter and slid it across the counter. "Jin, take him out the back," Albert said into his earpiece. "Hand him to the authorities, no violence." As Jae-hoon was led away in handcuffs, Albert slumped against the counter, breathing in the cold air. He had ended the war without firing a single shot. The price of excellence had been paid, and for the first time, the currency wasn't blood. 6 months later, the shadows that once defined the Lee estate had been completely chased away by the morning sun. The high stone walls remained, but the iron gates were now often open, welcoming tutors, music teachers, and laughter. Albert stood on the veranda, no longer wearing the heavy black suit of a syndicate boss. Instead, he wore a simple navy sweater, watching the scene in the garden below. Mira was running through a field of newly planted sunflowers, the very flowers her mother used to tell her to imagine when they were freezing in the alley. She was dressed in a bright yellow school uniform, her backpack bouncing as she chased Jin, who had transitioned from a cold bodyguard to a patient uncle who carried her books. Suji sat on a bench nearby, sketching designs for her new boutique. Albert hadn't just given her a job, he had helped her open the Pearl Needle, a high-end fashion house that employed other women who had fallen through the cracks of society. "Time for school, Mira," Albert called out. Mira skidded to a stop and raced up the stairs, throwing her arms around Albert's waist. "Mr. Boss, Papa, did you put the lucky charm in my bag?" Albert knelt, looking at the vibrant, happy child who had saved his life with a whisper. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, polished silver pin in the shape of a needle, a tribute to both his mother and Mira. He pinned it to her lapel. "Always, it represents the standard of excellence, not just in books, but in kindness." That afternoon, they gathered in the Grand Library. A judge sat at the mahogany desk where Albert used to sign cold business contracts. With a final stroke of a gold pen, the papers were finalized. Mira was officially Mira Lee. As the sun set over Seoul, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, Albert realized that his empire was no longer built on fear, but on a legacy of protection. The Ice King had found his warmth, and a little girl who once whispered in the dark now sang in the light. From an alleyway to an empire of grace, they had proven that while power can build a throne, only love can build a home. The story of Albert, Mira, and Suji reminds us that our greatest moments of strength often come from our moments of greatest vulnerability. A man who had everything realized he had nothing until a child who had nothing gave him the truth. In a world that often tells us to look away from the suffering of others, may we all have the courage of Mira to speak up and the wisdom of Albert to listen. Legacy isn't what we leave behind in bank accounts. It's the lives we transform and the light we bring to the dark corners of the world. Thank you so much for joining us for this 30-minute journey of redemption and hope. Stories like this remind us that family is a choice we make every single day. If this story touched your heart, please let us know by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more cinematic tales of human connection. We are building a global community of story lovers, and we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know. Which city or country are you watching from? We read every single comment. Until next time, remember, the smallest whisper can change the loudest world. Take care of yourselves and each other. Goodbye.